What a treat to be here. I only just started at Stanford in August, and it's a thrill, it's a joy, and so I'm really grateful to have been asked to come and talk to you. I've been in Minneapolis for a few days enjoying the snow and the hospitality. And so I'm going to talk to you about the history of text technologies, and I'd just like to go back to something that Roz said. The humanities, you'll all know, have come in for a bit of a pasting recently. We're not STEM, we're not useful, we don't produce anything. But in fact, the point that Roz made was really profoundly significant about the way that the humanities and STEM subjects come together to try and make the world a better place. And that sounds a little bit pat too, but it really isn't, because education underpins so much of the innovation and the renovation that we seek to do. And we're going to learn a bit about that in terms of the history of education and the history of text technologies or human communication, or the history of the book in its most capacious sense in the next 10 minutes or so. So you're all very prescient, and you think that e-books and real books will move along together. And I think when we think of the real books, in our mind, too, all of the millions of books that have been created since the dawn of time, again, in this kind of broad sense. And we have no intention of getting rid of them, right? So in that sense, real books and e-books will continue along together. But there is a really big debate about the future of the book. It seems to be on the news, on the radio or television, or in the newspapers, the ones that still survive, with real, incredible frequency. And a lot of the prognostication that comes forward, or the fortune-telling that comes forward from these things, brings us to this point. Bye book. And we're talking about, in terms of the history of textual communication, 62,013 years since the Blombos rocks, they're actually ostrich eggs, were created with systematic markings on that seem to be an early form of writing. So 62,000 years of the history of text technologies has brought us to this dire moment where we can forecast, of course, or not, the demise of the book. And the kinds of figures that we're likely to see are that of the 75, from the Pew Institute, of the 75% of Americans who read at least one book last year, in 2012, 23% of them, up 6% from the preceding year, chose to read that book as an e-book, whereas 67% of the Americans, down 5% from the preceding year, chose to read that book as a printed book. So these kinds of figures, together with other kinds of change, are very much at the forefront of the headlines in relation to human communication at the moment. And one of the key things is this idea of change, not just in our reading habits, but change in the platform that we use to access the materials that we read. So the very rapid obsolescence, for example, of varying kinds of platforms. One thinks back, the earliest e-books were on Palm Pilots. Did anybody actually have a Palm Pilot? Did you? Yeah, my husband did too. My husband buys everything. Honestly, we have drawerfuls of phones and things, which I don't know why he's keeping them all, but I'm sure there's something more useful we could do with them. But so rapid obsolescence. And in fact, this week, Thorsten Himes, who is the ED of BlackBerry, just gave a talk on Monday where he said, forget about the death of the PC, forget about the death of the e-book reader, which is one of the ones that's supposed to die fairly soon. It's the death of the tablet that's next. The death of the tablet, because we're all going to be smartphone users. That's all we're ever going to do now, is take our smartphones around and use those. And so we see these kinds of figures about sales of e-book readers falling 36%, so therefore it must be about tablet technology. But at the same time, in the UK book industry, the digital book, as a general thing, the sales of that rose by 66%. What was interesting there is that actually, never mind the 66%, there is a 4% increase in reading, because what all of this technology is doing is leading to an increase in reading. So it has very great benefits, this idea of choice. But it's all about change. But, what about the future of the book? How can we learn about the future of the book? We can learn about the future of the book from the past, from this 62,013 years of the history of text technologies and the emergence of print technology in the 15th century, much earlier in the Far East. Of course, China had print centuries before it reached the West. But anyway, for our purposes today, we're thinking about the print traditions that emerged with Johannes Gutenberg in Mainz in 1450 or 1455. And here's a leaf from the Gutenberg Bible that was produced in about 1455 and survives in 180 copies. And we're thinking about this idea of change. And of course, Print brought about huge differences in the world at large, in the Western world at large, because it allowed for the proliferation of books. 5 to 6 million books were published in the first 50 years of print. That is, in the incunabulum period, the cradle of printing, 1450 to 1500. 5 to 6 million books, 44,000 different titles. That is more than the whole of the history of text technologies prior to 1450 in just those 50 years. So the scale, it's about scale and velocity, and that's the same thing as now, right? In terms of scale of production, 3 trillion bits of data are added to the world's universal digital dump every second. 3 trillion bits of information per second. Amazing. So change, technological development. But what's particularly interesting and what we can learn about technologies at this point is the way that when technologies evolve, they are hybridized or sedimented technologies. In other words, we use the terminology, we use the form, we use what we know of preceding technologies as we invent new ones to familiarize our users with this material. This looks like a medieval manuscript, right? Second half of the 15th century. It's a book of hours, a book of prayers. But in fact, the words are printed, but the gold initials and the illumination are hand-done. So it's a hybrid technology in order to make the thing familiar and usable to its producers and users. So the big themes that we see in the history of text technologies are these things like change, hybridization, velocity, speed, and democratization. The proliferation of the book brings about the democratization of literacy, something that we know is particularly important. And in case you didn't know, one of my wonderful colleagues in the Department of English just won the Pulitzer Prize, Adam Johnson, who wrote about North Korea. So of course I dropped him a note and I said, got anything I can say about the history of the book? And this is what he said. He said, I think we're witnessing not the demise of the book, but its democratization. Now anyone can be a publisher. Of course, that is true. Books are going to be everywhere and in every format. That's a very optimistic, typical Adam Johnson quotation. He is the most extraordinarily buoyant and optimistic colleague you could want for. But one thing is not futuristic. One thing is actually true of the whole history of the past, and that is books in every format, because books have existed in every format since the dawn of time. And of course, as usual, Alan Turing got it right, as encapsulated here in this quotation by George Dyson, that everything that we do now in the digital universe and so on are mere variations on early codes and machines. Because early technologies, early codes, and of course the origin of tablet technology is in my hand at the moment. It is a Babylonian cuneiform tablet from 2000 BCE with its code, as you can see there, that requires literacy in order to decode it. And look at the hand. And if this was an iPhone, I'd have these tablet technologies in separate hands. Because the hand, look at your hand, is about Fibonacci sequence, is about the golden ratio. It's 3:2. It is perfect, perfect. Hence the page, hence the Babylonian cuneiform tablet, hence the little gadgets that we wave around. So it's about flexibility of form and, of course, flexibility of terminology. So we can talk about scrolling down the page when, of course, that is based on papyrus technology of the 3000 BCE to about, well, in fact, we still use scroll technology, but papyrus died out and was replaced by other materials. But from the papyrus scroll, we then developed the codex, and the earliest codices are made out of papyrus, like this. They realize it's better to cut it and bind it to protect it than it is to leave it in that scroll format where the edges of the scroll are so friable or frangible. And this is one of the Nag Hammadi codexes that contains apocryphal material from the 2nd century CE that was found in an earthenware pot in Nag Hammadi in the Egyptian desert in 1945. So incredibly important. So this flexibility of form. The books that we're used to seeing, that's, sorry, a big picture of that. The books that we're used to seeing look like this, about this early code. And we're used to seeing books that look like this, but we can't tell much from the digitized image. We can't tell, for example, that each folio, this is 15th century antiphonal, it's so huge, you could all sing it with me if I asked you to join in, is made of one whole animal skin. One whole calf skin goes into making this. So imagine the actual size of that book is rather large. So it's early code and decoding. But how do we display and curate something like this, something that already exists, something that will continue to exist in this digital era. And of course, at Stanford, under the auspices of Dr. Ben Albritton, we have the world's finest digital repository of medieval manuscripts, a project of which is Parker on the web like this. And what this can do for scholarship or for general access, because many of these materials are now digitized, is absolutely incredible in terms of helping us understand both the past and the future of the book. We have features where we can zoom right into the individual pictures in this 6th century St. Augustine's Gospels, which is the very book on which the Archbishop of Canterbury plants his lips when he's being ordained in Canterbury Cathedral. It was a couple of months ago, in fact. They took it down on the train, and he left his lip marks for posterity. And we can see amazing amounts of zoomability, so we can go right into that little picture of a bell that is meant to be about the Eucharist, left by a later user of the book. We also can have access to the book through touch the pages or turn the pages technology, which all of you will have seen, which emulates the book through a glass screen. But we can't touch it except that. Catherine Kuchenbecker, who's a former alum, 2006 PhD, she's now an engineer at Penn, is developing haptic photography, where she's using touch sensors so that we would be able to touch that through a pad with sensors and feel the parchment as we turn the page. So curation and display is absolutely incredible. And we have born digital books, something separate again, where we can interact with the device of either the fantastic flying books of Mr. Morris Lesmore, which won the Oscars last year, or of Al Gore's Our Choice, where you can blow into the device and make the wind rotors on the machines work to see how wind technology helps us in terms of renewable energies. So born digital books, something different, but what can they not do? What will they never do? As Billy Collins, former poet laureate of the United States, reminds us of the people who interact with the very books themselves. They are often unnamed. The users of these books are unnamed. They are anonymous men or women catching a ride into the future on a vessel, the book, more lasting than themselves. Because users of books like my ancestor, Edward Evans, I found this little leather Welsh Bible, didn't pay much attention to it, saw it, it's got his name written in it, not once, but 35 times, as he left his effort to be remembered. When I am dead and out of mind, in this book my name shall find. When I am dead and in the grave, in this book my name shall have. And that is all that we have, the touch of the touch, as I touch it, the touch of the man who touched my book. So we cannot replicate that in any way. And when my students come to the special collections, and when you come to Stanford, come and look at the special collections. We have this edition, first edition of Milton's Paradise Lost, signed by Thomas Jefferson, as you can see, and on the other page, by Madison. There is nothing that you can do digitally to replicate that. So you were right. You were right all along. And though Turing says we can only see a short distance ahead, we know that the book, in all its forms, will continue to survive. Thank you.